Hey fellow writers, it's me, Happy Girl Just Vibing here, back with another video. So this is lesson 3, It All Starts as Crap, because I know when you first start your story, it's very hard to get into it, because it just sucks, I just want to revise it. But, we're gonna get right into this, and just let it go. It all starts as crap. So, here we go. Now I know it says it all starts as crap, but you know what? The good news is it gets better. I have a little drawing I did from 2016 to 2018. I'm not the best artist, I'll admit that, but I know that I can improve the more I work on it. Writing is the same thing. You have your ups and your downs, and that will never change. But just know that it gets better. So hang on to every little piece of writing you use, because even if it's written badly, you can always go back and fix it and retype it and redo it. Speaking of redoing your things, think about self-revision, okay? So I know self-revision is super hard because I have to separate my brain to be my writing side of my brain and my editing side of the brain, because if I let both of them, they'll go at it for days. So when you're self-revising, you got to remember you can't fix something that isn't there. So in the first place, you need to let go of your writing brain and just focus on getting your manuscript or your writing or your poem, whatever you're working on, get it down on paper. If you don't get it on paper, you can't fix it. And eventually, your brain's not a vault as much as you like to think it is. So eventually, you will forget and it will disappear forever. And you'll never be able to get it back, okay? And a lot of people get stuck in one place. So they'll get stuck fixing the same chapter over and over and over and over again, and they never get anything else done. Don't do that. Write it down, be satisfied that you have it down, move on. You can go over and get stuck after everything is finished. That's fine. You can revise as much as you want, as long as you have it down first. So don't just write one chapter and then write 3, 4, 800 times redoing that one chapter till you get it right, just because you never will. You never will get it right, and you just have to accept that, because you will never be satisfied, because you know you can always improve, and every time you write, you improve. But if you have the whole storyboard, then you'll do a much better job at revision and improving than if you were to work on the same chapter over and over again, okay? It's not always adding in details either. Sometimes details need to be taken away so that you can leave room for your readers to imagine things. So if you do such a vivid self-description, or a vivid description of the scenery or whatever, that's great, but also you want to leave room for the imagination. If it's a fantasy world, give just hints, just give the littlest things, and then 9 out of 10 times, maybe even more than that, the reader will come up with something way better than you can. You just lead the reader in the right direction and let them go from there. Also, adding in foreshadowing is great with self-revision, especially if you have the whole thing, because now you know how it ends, you know what happens, so you know exactly what to add in there to hint at your big climax. And then it's just fun to have a self-revision, to watch yourself improve. To watch yourself improve, I would highly recommend keeping multiple Word documents. So you have draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, all the way until you have your final draft, and then you have the hard copy in your hand or whatever, okay? Because when you do that, you can look back at your first draft and go, oh, that's so bad. But you can look at and see how bad it is compared to the final draft, and you can feel so satisfied and proud of yourself because you did that. The next thing I would recommend is, with self-revision, retype everything word for word. If it's not worth retyping or rewriting a second time, then maybe just leave it out. Okay, so if your whole story, I don't want to retype it all, well, when you go by word, you can see an entire sentence and you can be like, I don't want to write that entire sentence. Great, you can actually narrow down that sentence and refine it to something that's even better. So you don't have a long, lengthy sentence that's saying the same thing that a shorter sentence could, okay? The next thing I would do is read it out loud, or have somebody or even the computer read it to you. One of the great things about Word is it has a read out loud function, and when you have a monotone voice reading your book to you, it sounds a lot different than somebody with your voice reading it or somebody else reading it, because they can get those annotations. That one's great because the monotone voice helps you figure out where things are chunky or awkward. Lastly, try to get a new set of eyes, somebody who has never seen your story before. That way you can get a fresh, visceral reaction from them, and they don't know what to expect going into the story. So that way their review and revision is genuine. But always remember, I love this little quote up from Tumblr. Your writing seems boring and predictable because you wrote it, you read it a million times, you have it in your head, and somebody who's never read it before doesn't have this problem, which is why it's important to get a new set of eyes. Alright, so there's a lot of do and do nots when you're writing. For example, you do want to know what you're going to be doing before you start doing it. Because if you brainstorm, then you'll have lots of ways to take, in lots of directions to take your story. You don't want to just jump into it right away, because if you jump into it, it will be very messy and chunky, and you're not going to know what to do, and you're going to have plot holes, and everything's going to be messy. At the very least, if you're going to jump into your story and just write it by the seat of your pants, know the ending. Have your ending in mind. That way, at the very least, you know what direction you're going to take the story. Maybe you don't know the middle or the beginning, but if you have the ending in mind, that's all you need. Don't give up, run away, or stop writing. It can be so frustrating when you are writing, especially by the seat of your pants, where you don't know where you're going. But don't give up, because it gets better. It always gets better, even if it starts as crap. So keep at it, and eventually you'll have something you're satisfied with. You can plot a little or a lot, and that way you don't have to think about your stuff as much as you want. You can have an entire plot line, story arcs, and whatever as you're plotting, but once you finish plotting, you can get to the story. Or you can be like, I know the ending, let's go. And no matter which you pick, you're going to be writing a story. Don't think your stuff is crap, okay? At least not until after it's written. When you're writing it, don't let that editing revision brain go, oh, rewrite it. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck, just like I told you in the last slide. You want to make sure you got it all down before you bash yourself and be like, oh, this is so bad. But then you can fix it, and it will be fine. Always be familiar with your setting. That way you won't have inconsistencies or errors in your setting. If you have a magic system, let the magics have rules. Make sure it makes sense to you and your writers. It also helps your writing become more believable if you're consistent. You don't have to worry about grammar the first time around. Don't worry about grammar or spelling almost at all, okay? The first time around especially, because you're going to do so many more drafts until that final-ish drafts, like those last 2 to 3 drafts and your final draft. You shouldn't worry about grammar and stuff, because that's when it starts to matter, because that's when you're refining your story. For now, you're just getting it up. Do research if you need to, or as you go. Don't delete whole chapters. If you need to delete an entire chapter, an entire section, or like even a paragraph, put it in a scrap document. So in all your documents, you have all your drafts and whatever, make another document for that folder. So I have a folder for each of my books. So it would be book 1, and then it would be draft 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And then I have a document called scraps. And so whenever I need to scrap something, I take it out from that first draft or second draft or whatever draft I'm working on, and I put it in my scrap bin so I can use it later. Show, not tell. You'll hear this a lot. Make sure you're showing people, not telling them things. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Don't kill all your characters. It's hard to do. Use lots of colors. Colors are amazing. You can color code things, and it makes everything look so much prettier when you're like revising. You can do red spelling and grammar, blue is things I want to add or take away, and yellow is this and whatever, and it helps you visualize what you need to fix. Look at the good just as much as the bad, because it's so easy to get down on yourself, but it's so hard to be like, okay, I did this, this is good, I like this about my story. So make sure you're looking at the things that you enjoy and what you like about the story, as well as the bad stuff, and that will help you improve so much better. Now, about going back to killing about all your characters, I was just kidding about that, you know, but no, seriously, I don't kill all your characters. There are very few and far in between books that do this and do this well. Don't kill them for the sake of killing them. Do it to further your story or further your plot device. And remember, you want to care about these characters before you kill them. Otherwise, it's going to have no impact with your story. So just think about that if you're planning on killing your characters. Don't be afraid of trying new things. If you get stuck, try something you've never done before. Try going out and doing something you've never done before, maybe. Then you'll have a new experience to write about. Maybe if your story's going one way, try something new with it. Try taking it in a different direction. If you want to try something new with, like, maybe try a new genre with writing, or something you've never tried before. Also, writing every day helps. If you're going to go out and run a 5K, you don't go out and just do it in one day. You practice, you run, you try to run every day, you even if it's maybe just a mile instead of a 5K, but you train up to that. And that way when you get to the 5K, you're not, dying on the side of the road. So just think about that. If you write every day, it's going to be easier to get that book done. Be careful not to wander. A lot of people have this issue where, especially people who are jugglers, they tend to wander around from book to idea or thought or whatever. Try to stay relatively within the same range of ideas or idea and keep yourself there. A lot of people will wander around, be like, maybe I'll do chapter 5, and then maybe I'll do chapter 6, and maybe I'll do chapter 1. Just think about where you're starting your story, think about where you want it to end, and try to be as consistent as you can. If that's an issue, then again, juggle some things. Be like, I want to write a funny thing, or I want to write a romance thing, and then juggle those stories back and forth, shake things up a bit, and, refresh yourself. If you need to, write a short story, so that way you have a sense of accomplishment, because novels aren't going to be done overnight, but short stories you can write in one sitting. You can also try different versions of a scenario. So if somebody in your book is doing something, think about how many ways can they do this, and try writing a few of those. And watch the characters take over for a bit and see what they do. It can be really fun if you try that out. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was ways that you can revise. So I already talked about retyping everything word for word, but you can also play with the point of view. Maybe you want multiple point of views. Maybe you just want one. Maybe you want to use I or an omniscient or second. Play with point of view will change your story up more than you think, especially with different characters will view things differently. You can even change a major aspect of the story, which doesn't happen often, but when it does, it tends to be even better than you think it would be. So if you change something about the climax and get that little plot twist in there, you'll have a lot more fun with it, I feel like, and even the readers will have a lot more fun with it. You can also play with somebody else's suggestions. So if you have somebody reviewing your story and going back and forth, ask them for suggestions or where they think the story is going, and play with that. See what would happen if you took the story that way. Have a document for each draft. I've already talked about this, especially reading out loud or having somebody read it to you. Another great way to do it is having review functions in Word. So I had this little link hooked up, and it's one of my drafts that I've done, and I did review tracking on it. So everything I changed is visually available in that document. Unfortunately, because I am doing this, if I click on that link, it will take me out of my video and you guys won't be able to see it, but just know that that tool is available for you. So here's some advice on self-revision. You want to be aware of how often you're using the same words, because sometimes you'll repeat yourself without even noticing it. When you're reading out loud or retyping word for word, you'll notice this, but otherwise you won't. Another thing you can watch out for is pronouns. They can be super tricky, especially if you change the point of view or if you're using different point of views. So make sure that you search up all the pronouns you can think of with the control find function and make sure that they are the proper ones. You can also make a list of the first word of every sentence. This is especially great for short stories and poetry. So that way, the first word, if you're using the same first word a lot, maybe you might want to change something up. Another thing you can try is going through each sentence and making sure that they're active and not passive. If you don't know what that is, a simple Google search or YouTube video will pop that up. Basically, if you can add attacked by zombies at the end of the sentence, it's probably passive. So, for example, make a list of the first word of every sentence and then get attacked by zombies. That's pretty passive, so maybe I should change that sentence, but I left it there for this very reason. So just think about that kind of stuff, and always put the subject first and then the adjective. This will help strengthen your story so much, and probably even shorten long sentences, which can be very helpful. Remember, especially when you're self-reviewing, unless it's the final draft, there will always be another draft. So you might not even be satisfied, and you can always go back and fix it until that very final last one. And then you just need to be kind to yourself after you're done being hard on yourself. When you finish that last draft, you should be very, very proud. Be kind to yourself, even if you're not satisfied with it. You got it done. And somebody else will be more than satisfied with it. Because honestly, you might be satisfied with something, then a couple months later, you'll look at it again after you're done with your final draft and be like, oh no, I really hate this again. That happens more often than you think, and that's okay. But just be satisfied. Just know that you did it, and you should be proud. I've mentioned this before, and I'll mention again, always keep the drafts. Not only will you be able to see your improvement, but you'll also be able to track it and use some of the stuff that you tossed out somewhere else. So don't throw them away. Keep them, keep track of them, have an entire folder for your books with each of the drafts, and you will be much more happy with yourself, I promise. Now, whether you're doing your own or somebody else's book as you're reviewing it, here are some tips to think about. So remember that peer reviews are not the same thing as peer edits. Peer edits are looking at grammar, spelling, the little things, nitpicking. Peer reviews are more broad thing. It's fine if you do both, but the bulk of your feedback should be reviewing the book and talking about what's good, what worked, what didn't, where it feels awkward, that kind of suggestions you have, that kind of stuff. So if you're peer reviewing, again, even if you're self-reviewing, look for the good as well as the bad, because I promise there's both. Even if you're like, oh, I hate this story, this is not for me, there's something good in there from that writer that they worked really hard on, and I'm sure you can find it in there. There's something good in every piece of writing, even if it's not for you. So look for that and let them know about it. Look for places that feel jammed, forced, rushed, awkward, slow, anything that makes you stop and think, what? Or, huh? Or, oh my goodness, that happened way too fast. This fight scene is way too slow. That kind of stuff. Point it out to the author because they won't catch that as easily as you do. Especially new readers. Like, when you have a fresh pair of eyes, they'll catch that way easier than other people will. Think about ideas that you can offer to the readers. Say, hey, I think this is going to go in this direction, or hey, could this go in this direction, or hey, I don't like how this happened. What if you did this? Remember, they're all suggestions and possibilities, which is totally fine to offer, but don't pressure them. Be like, this is what I have, this is my idea, use it if you want, use it if you don't, because ultimately the author has the final say. Think about ways that you may have written this story yourself. Again, that's with the suggestion I just talked about. Think about a place that maybe you would have the writer start with. I read about a 20-page paper written by somebody, and it was like a short story, and I was like, honestly, I'd rather read the story starting on page 5 and go from there. Because 1 through 5 was a lot of exposition, background, whatever, and I was like, I'd rather figure that out later, in the story and sprinkle it in, and that's what they ended up doing because I wasn't the only one in that workshop that thought that way. So think about different places that you would, when you're reading, you're like, yeah, page 1 to 2 isn't for me, or this first paragraph isn't for me, start on the second paragraph, that kind of stuff. If you're confused about something, you're like, hey, I don't know what's going on, I don't care about this character, maybe you don't have an exposition, or maybe they have 5 pages of exposition and it's too much and you just don't care through it and you skim through it, maybe point that out. Show them that, hey, I don't want all this information, it's overwhelming. Be sure that, again, these are suggestions, so don't be too forceful with them. And then the last one, it's a bit cut off up there, but it says read through it at least twice. Because the first one, you're reading through it, you can write down your initial reactions. The second time you're reading for it, you can look for things that are wrong. And also, it's easier to review something when you know how it ends. That way you can look for foreshadowing or the lack thereof. So think about all these things if you're reviewing somebody else's or your own paper. So earlier when I was talking about peer reviewing, I was talking about writing down everything you think. This is a list of things that you can do. So spur of the moment, maybe a little emoji or LOL, this made me laugh, first thoughts, first impressions, like, oh, I thought he's going to end up with this person, or not this person, or oh my goodness, I thought she was gonna die but she didn't, that's so cool. Things that just you're like, oh, moments in the book, or when you read a sentence like, I don't know why, but I absolutely love the way this sounds or the way this is. So write those things down, because those initial impressions also often help people. Like, hey, I'm a little confused about what's going on here. Maybe they wanted you to feel confused, so maybe that's why they did it that way. So again, never say, oh, I think you should change this because I feel confused, because maybe, again, they wanted you to feel confused. So just write down your feelings, not you should kind of deal. Write down things that you feel are conflicting. Like, hey, he said this one thing in this part of the story, but in another part of the story, he's saying a different thing. These are contradicting each other. This helps with plot holes and that kind of stuff, especially with magic system. Like, hey, I thought you said they couldn't do this magic, so why is he doing this? Because sometimes the writer kind of forgets these things, but readers will catch them. Write about things you want to know more or less of. You're like, oh, I love this character, write more about them. Or you're like, wow, this description was really long, maybe narrow it down, because I would like to, put a little bit of my imagination into it. So write down those things. Reactions are good. There's nothing more valuable than a person's reaction to your story, because ultimately the authors want to know how the readers are going to react, and they want to get certain reactions out of certain points of the story. So if the reader's like, whoa, that was a plot line, is he coming? The author loves that. But if the reader reads the plot line and goes, I saw that coming since chapter 2, whew, that might be a little bit more harsh, a little bit more hard. That way the author knows, maybe I made it too obvious, so I need to not make it so obvious, so the plot line is a bigger reaction. And don't say, oh, I liked this because, or I didn't like this because I didn't feel like it was good. Give specific reason, like, oh, I liked this because I love the images you used, or I don't like this because it just doesn't seem like it works with the story. That kind of stuff. Just saying it was good or it was bad are great for first impressions, but for reviewing, you want to tell the author why, so that way they can either stop it or do it again. Alright, I mentioned earlier the consequences and the harshness of should. You never say should. There's something about it that just makes it, I don't know, undesirable to hear and undesirable to put down. Again, it's just like, hey, this is my reaction, this is what I think, maybe you could do this, but you never say you should. Like, it's kind of sounding like you're scolding the author for something they wrote, and that's a horrible thing to do. So if you're going to give good feedback, don't use should. Think about a different way you can say it. Do you want to say, hey, I would like to see, or I think you should, like, I think this could happen, instead of I think this should happen. I think this could happen, or think, oh, I would write it this way because it makes sense in my head to do it this way instead of the way you did it. Or I think this part is kind of funky or crazy, or I felt like, tell them that way. Because maybe, again, going back to the slow part, maybe they're like, oh, this fight scene feels too slow, I don't like it. Maybe they wanted the fight scene to feel slow and drawn out instead of quick and done. Maybe they wanted you to feel confused at a certain part. That's why you should think about how to rephrase should. There's so many reasons, and these are just a tiny smidge, a little sprinkle of some of the reasons. So we're reaching the end here with some general advice. So again, don't focus on grammar, spelling. Keep in mind that reviewing and editing are two different things. So don't use should. Put out your thoughts. Focus on your first impressions. And don't be too mean, but be honest. You don't want a mom review that's like, oh, everything is perfect, I love it, you're amazing. Be like, hey, this was good, this was bad. Be very straightforward and blunt, because when you pitter-patter and kind of dance around the subject, it does more harm than good. So be honest, but don't be a bully. Don't give mom reviews and be like, everything's perfect, and color code things. That way, when someone's looking at your peer review, they can see, oh, this green one means there's a note on the page for this, or, oh, the red means grammar errors, and the blue means where things feel awkward, and stuff like that. So just think about that and try it out. If you're reviewing, and you're reviewing a lot, maybe you'll run out of space. This is what I do when I run out of space. It's just a nice visualization of what happens when I run out of space and how I fix it. So I put numbers in, and I'll write it on a separate piece of paper. So I'll put 1 in a section and highlight it. So the green 1 means that it's on another paper. So the green means it's on another paper, 1 means it's this section, 2 means it's wherever the next section is. So that way you don't have to like cram little tiny things if it's printed on the singular sheet. You can leave more room to say what you want to say. If it's in a Word document, you just use the little function that lets you highlight the section and then make a comment on it, and you can write as much as you want in the comment. But this is the way to do it if you have paper and it's hard copies. So some tips for reviewing poetry. So if you're not doing a novel or anything, but you're doing poetry, just keep in mind that you don't have to understand it. But if you don't understand it, think about how it feels, or read it out loud and think about how it sounds. Does it flow or feel forced? Does it feel chunky and crowded? Does it sound nice and flowing? How does it look aesthetically? Is it like different where it's not just straight down poetry and it makes a shape, or it goes diagonally? Just look at it and see how it is. Check the tempo of each line to make sure that they're matching. To do this, you count each syllable and write it down. So you'd be like, this is a stanza I wrote for one of my poems. Look up at the stars and count to 10. That's 10 syllables. Let's see how many we can find, my friend. That's 10 syllables. But if you look in the stanza, it's 10, 10, 11, 11. In one of my stanzas, it's 9, 10, 11, 11. So like, as long as they're within the same kind of syllable range, they'll sound a lot better and a lot less chunky if you're trying to do kind of tempo or a meter to it. If you're not doing a meter or a tempo, then you don't even need this kind of step. But just, it's something to think about. Another thing to think about is what rhymes. So friend doesn't really rhyme with any of these, but fear and ear rhyme. So, you know, think about how it rhymes and how it sounds, and think about those kinds of things with poetry. Not only do you need to think about what's going to be peer-reviewed, but you need to think about who's reviewing your stuff. You want someone preferably from your target audience, because they are going to be the ones that you're trying to get your book out to. If you get someone that's not in your target audience, likelihood of them liking your book is kind of small. So think about, okay, my friend really likes romance novels, and I'm writing a romance novel. But if you like, my friend really likes romance novels and adventure, and I am writing a science, historical, steampunk, fiction-y book, maybe they won't like it. Don't let that person who you're like, well, I don't think they'll like it, don't let them read your book and give you feedback. I mean, you can, but you're going to get much better feedback from somebody who enjoys your book than from somebody who doesn't. It's going to be a lot more honest, and it's going to be a lot better, because people who don't enjoy your book will just kind of mark the whole book and be like, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this. But somebody who's in your target audience is going to be, oh, I like this, I didn't like this, but this was really good, and you'll get a mixed review instead of just bleh review. So think about who's in your audience, who's going to read your book, and try to get somebody to do that. Make sure you also get somebody who's not afraid to be honest and blunt with you, because if you get somebody, I call them mom reviews, that are just going to sing the praises of your book and say, this is perfect, it can go be published right now on the first try, that's probably not who you want. You probably want somebody who's going to give you honest opinions and a good set of feedback. Again, you want a new set of eyes, but it's also not bad if they've seen it. So they could be like, oh yeah, you fixed this, and oh, you didn't fix that, and oh, you made this change and it's so much better, or oh, you changed it and I think it was better the other time. So having a mix of those two is great. Anyway, yeah, so these are some people who can peer review your stuff. If you are having someone peer review your stuff, it's only right that you peer review theirs. This is often how it works. So they always tend to go together. So if you have somebody reviewing your thing, it's best to meet in person, maybe over Zoom, but if you're face-to-face, it's a lot easier to ask questions and get feedback as well as the written feedback. When you are the one getting the feedback, don't talk while the other person is talking. Don't be like, oh, well, I explained that later. No, they don't know that. So just zip it, observe. When they are done talking, or the group or whoever read your book, when they're done talking, then you can ask questions. Be like, okay, well, why did you feel that way about this section? Or how did you feel about this section you didn't talk about it? Or, hey, can you elaborate about this one critique you said, okay? Another thing you want to do is prepare questions in advance. So prepare questions that you want to ask them, or prepare questions, maybe be like, when you hand them your script, be like, hey, will you mind looking out for these things? And that will help you get much more out of your feedback. So, like I said last slide, have questions to ask. This is a nice list. I would screenshot this or copy some of these down, but these are a whole bunch of questions that you can either ask to the person reviewing your things, or prepare in advance, or ask to the person who read your stuff or is reading your stuff, because it's always great to have questions, and there always will be questions. So if you prepare some in advance and then you can write some down as you're listening to people criticizing your stuff, you will get much more out of your workshop. So if someone's saying something, you're like, oh, I wonder why they said that, or why they think that way, right? You can add it to your list, okay? Obviously, you don't want to overwhelm them with questions, so you don't want to have like all of them, but the ones that do apply to you at that time. Try to pick a couple, maybe 3 or 4, and go with it. See what the answers are. And it's always great questions to ask yourself as you're reviewing too. And that is, I know, a lot, but that's how to do your reviews. So even if it starts as crap, eventually after this whole process of revision and peer reviews, you'll end up with something much more refined, as something that you could be really proud of.